I'm acutely aware that this is not going to be a fun ride. I called for the vaccine products to be withdrawn from the market about 3 years ago.
Some of us have said, damn it, we're going to stand up and say no.
My position on that has not changed. All drugs have toxicity. It's just a question of at what dose and how frequent and how severe. It's going to be super important that the ACIP goes back to focusing on the data. So all I have to do is just be true to the truth, be true to the scientific method.
On June the 10th, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. made his boldest move yet since he launched the MAHA movement, retiring all 17 members of the CDC's Advisory Committee for Immunization Practices and replacing them with a new team of scientists and experts committed to transparency, safety, and medical freedom. One of those newly appointed members is Dr. Robert Malone, an architect of the original mRNA platform and one of the fiercest critics of the pharmaceutical industrial complex. In this conversation, one of his first since joining the committee, Dr. Malone joins me to expose how vaccine safety has been rigged for decades, why the COVID vaccine should be withdrawn, and how Big Pharma captured public health and whether this new effort can finally begin to break the cartel that controls the system. We also go deep on what true scientific integrity looks like, why rigged placebo trials have distorted public health, and how ordinary people can push back to help build a health system that truly serves humanity and not corporate profits. It's one of the most candid, comprehensive conversations you'll hear, and it matters because the battle for medical freedom is far from over. Before we dive in, if you value conversations like this, then please make sure you're subscribed to the channel, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on Spotify. By following our channel, you're going to be one of the first to know about our forthcoming episodes and help to reach more people with powerful conversations like this. Now, here's my conversation with Dr. Robert Malone. Welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you here.
Thanks for having me on, Dan, and it's great to talk to my friends and colleagues in the UK again.
Of course, and actually it's fascinating. We're finally here 5 years on. I've spoken to many of the prominent voices and activists over the last 5 years, and you're someone that we've worked alongside. We've stood on stages together across the world, and today finally we get to have a frank discussion about the latest state of play. So I know that at this stage we're very early in the developments with regards to your latest appointment, but I'm curious, why did you accept this appointment, and do you see this as an opportunity to redeem something within the system that is many have seen as irreparable?
Okay, so let's start with, and sorry for the fly that just walked in front of my camera. I live in a horse farm. And first off, the disclaimer, I'm not representing the interests of the United States government. Any comments that I make here today are my own. They don't reflect the position of the U.S. government. Furthermore, I've been directed and embargoed from talking to the press about ACIP matters. So you're asking me a general question about why I agreed to accept this position offered by Secretary Kennedy. And the answer is, of course, as I've said all the way along, I don't seek power or a particular appointment with the government. I had various individuals advocating that I should take a formal position within the administration, and I was really not interested in doing that. I have spent enough time working with and closely with the government. I'm very familiar with DC culture. I don't like it very much, and I don't want to have to leave my farm. Furthermore, we have a very active Substack and publishing career now, and I would have to give that up if I accepted a full-time position. Bobby offered me this position on the Advisory Committee for Immunization Practices of the CDC, and as I have said repeatedly, I welcome an opportunity to serve my government, serve my country if I'm asked or called to duty to do so. And this is the acronym is a FACA. This is a Federal Advisory Committee that is very much part-time. It's an established process of federal advisory committees. It has its own guidance in terms of conflict of interest management. It has its own charter, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to serve on this committee. One thing that you, Dan, may not, of course, because you're not stateside, you're not attuned to all these nuances. These federal advisory committees are not supposed to be making policy. They're supposed to be advising particularly the executive branch. They're congressionally authorized, and what they're supposed to do is gather information and provide expert opinion up the food chain to, in particular, elected officials who were supposed to be the ones that set policy. Now, historically, we have arrived at a place, and I've sat in the audience on many, many, many ACIP meetings, but we've arrived at a place where the ACIP assessments and votes have come to the point where they've essentially been routinely rubber stamped by the director of the CDC, which is a political appointee from the executive office for the president. And in my opinion, that has to stop. If we've learned anything from the COVID crisis, one of the things we should have learned was that scientists should not be the ones making policy. Administrators shouldn't be the ones making policy. Elected officials are elected to make policy, and through their election, there is legitimacy conferred on them, and also through here in whether we're a representational democracy or a true democracy, we are able to hold the decision makers accountable through the electoral process. And we're not able to do that for the likes of Tony Fauci, just to pick a name, if he is the one setting policy. So the ACIP over time has kind of had mission creep, in my opinion, and has increasingly come to determine not just federal policy, but in its decisions, it sets standard of care across the United States as it relates to vaccines. And it also determines what products will be purchased automatically for the Vaccines for Children program, which will then be administered to any children who are deemed to be of the category that merits free vaccine products. And as a consequence, the decisions made by the ACIP are worth billions of dollars to the pharmaceutical industry. And anytime you have that level of financial interests, you'll have a lot of pressure in a wide variety of ways to try to bend the curve on any decisions. Just to illustrate, Dan, within about 12 hours of the announcement on X by the secretary that I was one of the appointees, I received a call from a UK-based consulting company inquiring as to whether or not I would be willing to consult at $4.50 an hour on the advisory committee on immunization practices for a pharmaceutical client. Of course, I said no. That's an overt breach of ethics, but it illustrates the point. So that's my position. I'm grateful to the secretary for the opportunity to serve. I don't seek this, and by the way, I'm acutely aware that this is not going to be a fun ride. I'm immediately was attacked by I don't know how many different corporate media outlets, and as were many of my peers, but I seem to be catnip in particular for many. And the ACIP team that has been nominated and is being confirmed right now will be facing incredible scrutiny by corporate media. We will undoubtedly be criticized from all angles, just as Secretary Kennedy is being subjected to voices on very loud, small number of voices on social media asserting that he should resign already because he has not eliminated the mRNA products from the FDA authorization. So that's the environment that I'll be walking into. It will absolutely not be any fun, and it's going to take a lot of time and effort to ensure that we have the data that we need, and that we don't allow ourselves to be rushed into decisions, and that those decisions are grounded in solid analysis and the best quality science that we can obtain. The committee does have subcommittees that will focus on they have not been established, but they will focus on individual issues. And the committee does have the authority, I've learned, to commission studies from the CDC. And so the committee will be able to say, well, we want to see this kind of data based on these kind of criteria. And I certainly anticipate that I will be one of the voices calling for rigorous analysis.
Quick break to tell you about the Thinking Society, our flagship course to help you reclaim your mind in a world of noise. Over the course of 6 weeks, you'll dive into the psychology of propaganda, cognitive bias, and the war on truth, and how to become radically better at thinking and seeing clearly in a world gone mad. If you're tired of being told what to think and ready to think deeply, independently, and courageously, this course is for you. Go to weareelevate.org/Thinking Society or click the link in the description to join us now. Now back to the episode.
Yeah, it's a fascinating time, and it sounds like it must have been a very difficult decision for you. I've read that previously you were clear you didn't want to be involved in an official capacity. You've mentioned your lifestyle. You're sat here in your home, your beautiful home, and you've become prolific content creator, writer, and now taking on an official responsibility at this time must have been a difficult call. Particularly with
just on the content creation part, Dan, I will, as a consequence of my appointment, the technical term is special government employee, and the compensation will be modest. They call it an honorarium, and they park us in the Emory Hotel right across the street from the CDC. This is not luxury accommodations, and we have to fly based on approved carriers, which means we're going to be in cattle class. I will not be able to comment or use any information that I acquire through my government service in the context of our Substack or our books.
Yeah, it's going to be a very interesting time. But will it prohibit you from making comment?
Yeah,
even privately.
I'm really pushing the edge here in what I've said. I'm not speaking about forward-looking things, except in the most general sense.
Yes. And what is your hope in taking on this official capacity? And as I hear you speaking about the challenges you've already faced, and they're not new challenges, fortunately, I'm sure you've developed quite a thick skin over the last 5 years. It seems like some of the old attacks have come back again as a result of the appointment.
Yeah, they have a limited number of tropes that they can use to attack me, and so they dip back into the same well.
Yeah, back into the same pot. But as a result, this is a really great opportunity, I think, to actually be judged on the evidence, which is perhaps what the biggest fear is if they have to come up with such attacks. But I'm really curious for yourself, the impact that you believe is possible. And I confess that I was skeptical of Bobby Kennedy's potential to make change in the government, not because of his character or because of his lack of will, but rather when one brushes up against the machinery of an institution that is designed to protect itself and preserve the status quo, would there be an opportunity to create real change? And I think he's already proved some of the doubters that change is possible. And I know that there's people who would wish that he could go further, faster, etc. But I think we, at least to see some material change in the time that he's been in office, is refreshing.
I think he's moving extremely rapidly, given the headwinds that he's up against and the nature of the bureaucracy, often referred to this as the deep state. One risk to be, acknowledge the 800-pound gorilla in the room is the drums of war that are currently beating or engaged. As Steve Bannon asserts, we're already deeply in World War III shooting war. We just aren't acknowledging it. So we have in a strange way, the corporate media, my wife likes to call it dead media, is now distracted. The war has pushed the issue of Bobby, Make America Healthy Again, ACIP off the headlines, and I welcome that. I don't seek the limelight here, and I don't think any of us do. We would like to be left alone to do our business. The momentum and the challenge are significant. The Maha Commission, of which Secretary Kennedy is the chairperson, has already produced the most broad-reaching health-related document in the history of the American government, to the best of my understanding, and is addressing multiple, using the war metaphor, multiple fronts at the same time, which is a challenge. They're basically taking on not just big pharma, but big ag, big food, big money, to various extents. And one of the challenges that those that are critics that things aren't moving fast enough don't seem to acknowledge is that this is an all-of-government effort. And so with the Maha Commission report that is out, which is basically a threat assessment about health, particularly for children, and makes the key observation that unless there's change, the children currently growing up in the United States will live shorter, less healthy lives than their parents. That's kind of a bombshell. And so this document and the one that's going to come out 100 days later, which is basically the operational plan, what are they going to do based on the things that they've identified, represents a compromise. And it's particularly evident in the context of agriculture and food. And at the rollout, I was privileged to be there at the White House during the initial conference. And it was very clear from the president's statements, from Senator Marshall's statements, from the Secretary of Agriculture's statements, from Secretary Kennedy's deference to farming and ag, that there was a compromise regarding the desiccants that are common in the United States. In the UK, you may not be familiar with this issue, but in the United States, it's become common agriculture practice for most of our grains and for soybeans, a major source of protein, that in order to facilitate harvesting using very large, extremely expensive commercial combines, instead of allowing the weather to determine when one harvests, what is being done is to spray, quote, desiccants, otherwise known as, for instance, Roundup or atrazine, on the crops. We're talking about wheat, soybeans, barley, rye, grain products. Spray these so that it kills the plant, kills the stem, then it all dries uniformly. And it can be done in such a way that you can schedule these $1 million plus machines, combines, to come in and harvest at a particular time, because that's the way American ag works. Is for many of these farms, you don't have the capital to have your own combine, and you don't use it that often anyhow. So they're basically contractors that come through and will do the harvest, and you have to be able to schedule them. In order to schedule them, you can't rely on the weather. You have to do something. And that introduces Roundup or glyphosate, for example, into the food supply in a significant way. And there's studies that show that in rodent models, and parallel studies in humans, for instance, coming from Canada, in pregnant mothers, that pregnant mothers in Canada, the majority of them have urine levels of glyphosate that when rodent models are exposed to those levels, the pups that are produced from those litters have clear physiologic changes, and those physiologic changes include autistic-like behavior and obesity, two major issues in the United States. So my point is that there are things that I know that RFK, that the secretary would like to address, that are far outside of the scope of ACIP. But the president acknowledges that the farm vote, the agriculture vote, has played a key role in all three of his elections. And he doesn't want to aggravate that community prior to the midterms, which are pivotal. If they lose the Senate or the House or both in the midterms, as is often the case for the party that recently rose to power, these reforms and changes and efforts to combat the deep state will all be for naught. Mm. So that's what's in play. Is on the big picture is this tightrope of attempted reform as it relates to health, wellness, food, coming into conflict with political realities and other constituencies that are represented by other sectors of the government. Over.
Mm. Mm. And how do you prepare yourself for that going into your role? Because undoubtedly, I'm sure you'll come up face to face with those same challenges in a different way. But how are you?
So my role is going to be really easy. I was trained as a young person to be brutally rigorous in my approach to science and hypothesis testing and hypothesis generation. Just hammered week after week after week by my mentor. What's the positive control? What's the negative control? What's the hypothesis? What are the data? How do you interpret them? Blah, 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 blah. And I came out of that with, I've actually had to temper it, because earlier on as a young scientist, I would speak very frankly, as my mentor had trained me to do, and often say things that were uncomfortable for other scientists or others that were very influential, particularly in being at places like the Salk Institute. As a graduate student, questioning postdocs and, Nobel candidate faculty. So this has been part of my trajectory, is to learn to temper that and be a little more diplomatic. So there's going to be a challenge, but these days it kind of comes naturally for me, having been through all that I've been through, to speak with integrity and honesty, but to temper it with language so that it's not smash mouth confrontational. I really admire Stephen Miller and the administration, his ability to take on the press, but I don't have the latitude to use that kind of language when confronting scientific peers, but I do have this rigorous training. So all I have to do is just be true to the truth, be true to the scientific method, be true to myself, my own insights and intuition. And I'm confident that in the other members currently, there'll be more added on. But this current core membership that's been nominated, I've been in meetings with them now. These are high quality people that are sincere in their intent to do the right thing. And I think that what will come out of that sausage making machine will be, I hope that it will be objective, fair, and balanced, not biased against pharma, not biased for pharma, not biased for vaccines or against vaccines, but looking at the data. For instance, a key parameter is number to treat per life saved or per major hospitalization avoided. And that's often lost in the discussion about vaccine products. Vaccine products have to be extremely safe because they're generally administered prophylactic vaccines we're talking about. So this is preventative. They're administered to people that aren't currently sick and that might never become sick. And so they should be held to an extremely high standard for safety. And if you're going to assert that you need to vaccinate newborns or children for a disease, young children in particular, at a time when they're particularly sensitive to all kinds of things, all kinds of biologic insults, then you darn well better justify that you absolutely need to do that intervention at that point in their life, just like you need to be extremely careful about administering drugs and vaccines to pregnant women because of teratogenicity and spontaneous abortion and all the other risks.
A quick break for a word from one of our partners. In times of economic uncertainty, gold has always been used as a safe haven for wealth. It's a tangible asset that has historically held its value even when markets were volatile. And now more than ever, it's crucial to have physical assets that can protect your wealth. That's why we've partnered with the Pure Gold Company. They offer a secure, reliable way to buy physical gold bullion and precious metals, whether you're looking to diversify your portfolio, hedge against inflation, or simply protect your savings. With fully insured gold products stored in world-class private vaults, you can rest assured that your physical gold is safe and secure. For bullion-grade gold bars and coins, the Pure Gold Company makes it easy to purchase physical gold that you can actually hold. If you're ready to take action and safeguard your wealth, then visit danastingregory.com/gold to download your free guide and take advantage of a free consultation to explore your gold bullion options. Now, let's get back to the show.
We need to focus on the patient. We need to minimize and mitigate the risk of vaccine damage in people that are otherwise healthy. We need to be really careful about risk-benefit ratio. I personally, speaking for myself, am an advocate for quality-adjusted life year cost-benefit calculations, and that can sound a little bit blunt, but in this Vaccines for Children program, the ACIP/CDC director /HHS secretary, because that's the food chain, the chain of command for these decisions, is authorizing congressional appropriations without congressional approval to make massive purchases, and it's a single source purchase in which the CDC functionally both is purchaser, distributor, and advertiser for these products. And that requires a particular burden of rigor, in a way that NHS there in the UK has a similar function, and because of your socialized medicine structure. So I think that it's just going to be super important that the ACIP goes back to focusing on the data, independent, objective assessment of those data, and a practical focus on particularly children, the need for additional interventions, potentially revisiting decisions that have been made in the past, potential drug-drug interactions. This is a nice way of saying vaccine-vaccine interactions. Those data don't exist. And we need to also be good shepherds of the fund of the taxpayer dollar, and authorizing a product that might prevent a very small number of deaths, but will incur a very large cost and convey risks to a large number of children, needs to be well justified. It can't be based, those decisions can't be based on emotion. There has to be some metric that says this is the right thing to do. This is why we need to spend the money on this and not on some other public health intervention that might be more cost effective. I think this is logic in acknowledging the NHS in the UK. The NHS, at least back in the day when I was actively engaged in a lot of these kinds of discussions, the National Health Service does use quality adjusted life year calculations to make decisions. The UK doesn't have the deep pockets or just ability to print money in the same way that the U.S. government does, and it has to be a little more focused on we could call it return on investment, ends justify means, whatever you want to say. They have to be a little bit more parsimonious with their money, and I think that personally, I think that the United States government, the U.S. government health community could learn a few things from the UK health community.
Robert, many would argue that vaccine safety, or the assertion of vaccine safety throughout history, has become an axiom that is uncontestable. It sounds to me that part of your objective will be to go and look at some historic decisions. I'm curious.
Well, that's me speaking for myself, just to be clear. It's not the policy of RFK Jr. right now. That's a very contentious issue. But in my opinion, some of the past decisions about various things like adjuvants, the use of certain agents that are added to ensure sterility for multi-use vials, the timing of the schedule, and whether that really is optimal for the health of the child. Is it necessary to provide hepatitis B vaccine at birth, for example? These kinds of things, in my opinion, need to be revisited.
Mm-hmm. And in your personal opinion, based upon your observations during COVID, for a lot of people, the what happened with the COVID vaccine is now led to a lot of people losing trust in the pharmaceutical industry, losing trust in vaccines, and as a result, in the data, it's all, and the government, and as a result, now people are less inclined to follow the childhood vaccine schedule, for instance. From a personal point of view, we've completely
and the data support that. That's not just pure speculation. We have strong data about declining vaccine uptake in general within the U.S. pediatric population and increasing questioning of these protocols. And it's a point of great contention in the pediatric world. In the United States, we have a very large number of pediatricians that will quite literally fire their patients or their patients' parents if they aren't fully compliant with the CDC schedule. So you have parents that if they question the schedule and they don't wish to have their newborn, for instance, inoculated with hepatitis B product, that is resulting in all kinds of kind of retaliatory actions by hospitals, obstetricians and pediatricians. Likewise, mothers who do not accept vaccines such as the COVID vaccine during pregnancy historically have also been subjected to enormous pressure. And in particular, this history of that developed during the COVID crisis of refusing transplants to people who are in a life-threatening situation if they will not accept the COVID vaccine. That continues into the present.
Wow. I mean, it never ceases to amaze me, some of the things we've witnessed. Will the ACIP have any influence over policy around informed consent or medical autonomy? Because this safety and benefit is one part of the equation, but the ability for someone to make their own personal choices is another part of the equation. Will that be in any way within
the ACIP, just speaking objectively, not a forward-looking statement, but just an observation. The ACIP in its vaccine schedule designates by color code, because they try to make this simple and understandable. They designate by color code whether they recommend that a vaccine be obligatory at a certain stage of life, or whether they leave it up to the discretion of the physician-patient interaction. And so there are vaccines on the schedule that are functionally optional. That means, of course, that school districts, for instance, can't mandate them. And by the way, if they're not mandated, as I understand the law in the United States, if they're not in the mandated list, but rather in the kind of discretionary consult with your physician list, then the indemnification, that's a fancy legal word to say you can't sue the vaccine companies. The indemnification, if you have harm, the indemnification that the government provides to the vaccine companies doesn't apply if the product is on that optional discretionary list, only if it's a mandated product. And so the recommendation to move a vaccine-related product to discretionary status, as happened with the COVID vaccines for healthy, normal adults, including healthy pregnancies, results in a situation in which the liability shield that's provided through the Vaccines for Children program no longer applies. And the inference is then that will probably, so the claim made by the industry, generally speaking, is that and this goes back to Reagan, basically after the H1N1 or whatever it was, swine flu outbreak back then, the vaccine industry, through its lobbyists, basically told the president that if he didn't provide them indemnification, they were out of here and they were no longer going to make products, and he was going to be faced with a public health crisis because there would be a sudden surge in childhood infectious disease that he would be blamed for. And so that this was kind of along the line. So, we have this line in America. You guys think we're all gangsters. Only some of us are gangsters. That's a nice business there. It would be a shame if something happened to it. And the version here is, that's a nice presidency you have there, Mr. Reagan. It would be a shame if something happened to it. And if you don't want it to happen, then you have to give us this protection. It is a pretty good metaphor. So that's what happened. That's how the indemnification came on, is they spooked the president. In many ways, the industry also spooked President Trump with its assertions, not just the industry, but also kind of the academic industrial complex, which tied into NIH and CDC, spooked the president with, based on a faulty modeling that coming from the London School of Tropical Medicine, about 3.4% case fatality rates. So that's where that's at, is you can, and there is examples of products being switched from the obligatory category to the non-obligatory consult with your physician category, and that has all kinds of ramifications. As I understand the secretary's policy positions, again, speaking for myself, not for the government, Bobby has been quite clear. He's walking a tightrope. He's been quite clear that his position is that he doesn't want to take people's vaccines away from them. Of course, that's the weaponized insult that's been thrown at him, is he wants to take vaccines away from parents and children. He's a mean, nasty guy, and he's crazy. That's the narrative that's been promoted, but he's been quite clear that that is not the case, but rather that his position is that these products should be at the discretion of the parent or the individual. So he's coming down on the medical freedom side, not on the more extreme position that these products should not be available to anyone, whether they wanted them or not. There is a momentum happening in the United States. I know in the UK you would probably be shocked by the marketing materials and the use of television and media to promote drug products, including vaccines. But here in the States, we're barraged by messages to take drugs and take vaccines. You encounter it as you walk in to get a prescription, or in all kinds of media. And the claim is, and I think there's good evidence supporting this, that the pharmaceutical industry bankrolls not just our elections. That's pretty clear, I think, all the way down to dog catcher. But they also bankroll corporate media or dead media. And they don't do that just to sell product. They do that to co-opt the media. So that media doesn't have to be necessarily selling the product, but if they're getting a substantial multi-million-dollar contract from pharma, they will be very unlikely to bite the hand that feeds them. And that's how that ecosystem works. Likewise, even though journals like the New England Journal of Medicine don't have advertisements, pharmaceutical industry buys large numbers of copies at full price of their work product, of the publications, and has made huge donations to virtually all of the medical, how do we want to call it, associations. You could call it cabals. You could call it a number of things. But, most of these medical associations, including the American Medical Association and its journal JAMA, receive major checks from pharma, and that does appear to influence their behavior. One of the things that the secretary has announced, I think it's came from Bobby, but it might have come from Jay Bhattacharya at NIH, is they're moving towards a decision that they will be launching government publications. So this is kind of akin to the CDC MMWR, but with full peer review. MMWR is not peer reviewed. So competitors, government subsidized competitors to academic journals, because that the perception is the academic journals, and the data are during COVID is quite clear. The academic journals have been largely compromised by pharmaceutical interests. And so there is a policy in the pipeline that academics that are funded by the government will have to publish in these presumably unbiased government academic journals rather than in the captured high-profile journals that are dependent on various forms of pharmaceutical industry subsidies. Oh, the howls of protest are amazing, and there's been just to illustrate, there was a petition from a small number of NIH employees or employees that have suffered. They've been made redundant, I think would be the way you talk about it in the UK. So like 200 people signed this petition, and out of tens of thousands of employees. And the corporate media, there was like 10 independent articles all amplifying this particular petition and the complaints of this small fragment of NIH current and past employees. But it's kind of fascinating as a case study to watch and observe which outlets are basically aligning precisely with the interests of the pharmaceutical industry and are parroting each other's content. By their actions, you will know them. They're kind of declaring themselves as not very independent journalists, let's say.
It's very, very revealing. Now, you said that Secretary Kennedy is coming down on the side of medical freedom, and I think that's something that's very much valued. People like myself very much appreciative of that. And this idea that, the way it's described almost sounds like we're not going to take away your children's sweets. I find it very peculiar, that language that's used. But nonetheless, on the safety side, and there are people that, I've been in the room with over the last 5 years who have stated that there is no gold standard safety study that has ever been done on vaccines. I don't know what your position is on that, but what would a gold standard for evaluating vaccine risk benefit actually look like if it was to be pursued?
So the issue is very well covered in this book that is by anonymous authors. I wrote the introduction to the French version, not that I can speak French, I guess it was all translated, called Turtles All the Way Down. It's the title of the book. And that seems an odd title for a book about vaccine safety and integrity. It refers to a metaphor that is it Terry Gilliam that does the Ringworld series, British author. So the metaphor is that how's the world held up? Well, it's held up by an elephant. Well, how is that elephant held up? Well, it stands on the back of another elephant. Well, how is that elephant held up? Well, it stands on the back of another elephant all the way down, or turtle. I'm sorry, they're turtles, not elephants. So turtles all the way down is the metaphor. And in relation to vaccines, what it's referring to, and this is what I was taught and practiced as a vaccinologist and clinical trial researcher for years, is the logic was built that it was unethical to test a new vaccine against a true placebo control. So, for instance, a saline injection. We already know that placebo controls have their own bias. People often perceive that they've had some sort of therapeutic benefit associated with the placebo control. And also, a true placebo control can reveal the incidence of the true incidence of individuals that receive an intervention, a shot or whatever, experiencing random adverse events like a headache, for example, or a fever. So if you're sampling the same population with the placebo, and that's a big if, and the intervention, say a vaccine, if you're comparing an old vaccine that has its own adjuvants against the new vaccine, even if the old vaccine is for a different disease, and that's been the logic that's been contrived over years now, is that it's not acceptable to test a vaccine in a population against a true control. You have to do something that is going to provide benefit to the child, for instance. And so you might compare this new product to a hepatitis B vaccine, or whatever the thing is. And that biases the data because you, in the control group over here, you will have a certain amount of signal that relates to nonspecific vaccine effects like in swelling, redness, fever, other adverse events, and may include, in a subset of children, various acute and chronic inflammatory outcomes, because you're giving something that is pro-inflammatory. In other words, it makes you generate both a adaptive and a innate immune response, and in some cases, that can affect nervous systems. It can affect the brain. It can be associated. There's a lot of data now suggesting that sudden infant death syndrome has a positive correlation with short-term response to vaccines in infants. So if you're comparing it against something that's not truly a negative control, like saline, which even saline has a placebo effect, if it's administered by needle, to the vaccine product, then you're kind of shifting the baseline. You're setting the baseline to accepting a higher level of adverse events, and then you're comparing this against that. And so suddenly it seems if you compared this against a true negative control, the new thing, then it might reveal that the new thing has some issues. But if you statistically, and the biostatistics on this are not easy because they're very large populations typically. And the smaller the difference, the larger the population to detect it. So at between $10,000 and $20,000 per enrollee, pretty soon you're in big money in order to do these statistical tests. But the industry has, for obvious reasons, been biased towards having some sort of an active control that raises the baseline for potential adverse events, and then the new product compared to that looks better. Does that make sense? And so that's the turtles all the way down, is that you've compared this vaccine to that vaccine to that vaccine to that vaccine to that vaccine all the way back to the early 60s, and that's not acceptable. Furthermore, a lot of those early 60s authorizations, is what we call approvals technically in FDA, marketing authorization. A lot of those products are kind of grandfathered in, and they were based on, the authorization to market was based on standards that are antiquated, that in modern day clinical research would not be considered acceptable. Very small sample sizes, very crude ways of gathering adverse event information. And then the industry has been very aggressive in saying, well, that was safe. Nothing's changed. They determined it was safe in 1963. What's your problem? And now we have all this experience subsequent that shows that it's safe. Well, actually, we haven't been capturing post-marketing data, so we don't really know that that's true or not. It's kind of a propaganda line. So that's the ecosystem in there. And then another thing that a nuance that your audience may find interesting, many people don't understand. Certainly in the United States, I can't speak for the NHS, but I think it's similar. Once you have a vaccine product that is on the market, then if you're going to introduce a new vaccine product for the same indication, you basically have to prove that it's at least equivalent, if not better, in terms of safety or effectiveness. Statistically, that turns out to be a wicked hard problem. You end up having the clinical trial size blow up, statistically speaking. And as a consequence, remember I said a moment ago, it's between 10 and 20,000 US dollars, sometimes more, per patient in one of these clinical vaccine trials. So the consequence is, if you already have a product on the market, it becomes extremely difficult for a new product, say based on new technology, on better manufacturing process, to enter the market, because there's a functional monopoly that's not protected by patents, but is protected by this cost of comparative clinical trial. So it's a huge barrier to entry into the market. And so functionally, once you got a product into this niche, particularly if it's authorized by ACIP, the Vaccines for Children program, it just is not financially feasible for a competitor to enter in the market, which means, among other things, that the government ends up paying a lot more because it's not true free market competition. You have basically a government-enforced monopoly because of these forces. And the industry is very aware of this. So what happens functionally in the United States is once you get a product into one of these new niches, and by the way, they've kind of mined out the easy stuff. And so now they're left with the hard diseases, and it's increasingly difficult to get a product into that. So there's a lot of pressure to do so. But once you manage to get a product on the Vaccines for Children list through the ACIP and its director of CDC, then it becomes standard of care. You get an automatic single point purchaser from the government. They do the marketing and distribution for you, and you functionally have a monopoly for life. So the commercial term for this is kind of the ultimate cash cow. And that's why the industry is so focused. That's why the industry is so profitable. When the industry is so focused on these dynamics, it is enormously profitable. And it has no liability because of this indemnification clause, and they set up this special vaccine court, and they tax the purchasing of each vaccine to populate the vaccine court with cash, which they then dole out independent of the vaccine companies to anybody that can successfully prosecute a claim that they've been vaccine injured. And that's how that whole ecosystem works. From the framework of a pharmaceutical company, it's perfect. They have achieved nirvana.
Can this be changed? Do you have hope that this can be changed? Because it's a cycle that needs to be broken.
Well, one thing that is breaking it is that we have this growing tide of parental and consumer wariness and recognition that this system is not truly a free market system, and that this logic of forced compliance and acceptance of these products is wrong ethically, and that people should have the right to make decisions about what goes into their bodies and those of their children. The counterpoint, reinforced by an antique Supreme Court decision in the United States, is that the government and representing the people has the right to require your compliance in the event of a infectious disease threat, like a epidemic outbreak of smallpox, for example, as has historically plagued the United States, or yellow fever, or whatever. The government has the right to swoop into a community for the common good and require that all community members receive medical product. That, I think, needs to be revisited. That's a legal issue. I think that there's a number of things that I advocate the Supreme Court take a look at, and that's one of them. That's what kind of enabled the Biden mandates, was that Supreme Court case. And there was efforts by various legal counsel to push back against that and to make the case that that old precedent didn't apply, but the courts decided that they decided on the side of, on behalf of the government. As Murray Rothbard, paraphrasing Murray Rothbard, one of the founding intellects behind the anarcho-capitalism movement that Javier Monnier is so much a fan of. So the Austrian School of Economics, Murray Rothbard makes the observation that the role of the judiciary relative to the state is to enforce and legitimize the state's interests. It's not to protect individuals. It's not to ensure the rule of law. It's to enforce and legitimize the interests of the state. And I don't see how you can argue very successfully against that after having been through the COVID crisis.
Exactly.
At least in the United States. So that's kind of the dynamic as there's, been built a tower of regulations, legal precedent, and then reinforced by this propaganda campaign that's been so successful that asserts that all vaccines are safe and effective, when in fact all drugs have toxicity. It's just a question of at what dose and how frequent and how severe. But all of that gets obscured with this false narrative of safe and effective that's repeated endlessly as a form of neurolinguistic programming, which is why our second book during the COVID crisis called Psy-War, Enforcing the New World Order, is all about propaganda, modern propaganda, and the 77th Brigade and fifth generation warfare tech, et cetera, censorship, is that that's a whole nother structure that's been built internationally. And of course, no one in the UK, I think, is unaware of the application of not just nudge technology, because you all watch BBC from time to time and you're bombarded with nudge, but direct government activities to suppress those on social media and otherwise that might say things that are considered to be beyond the pale and sensitive to British people and the British government, or divisive, racist, or whatever the euphemism is. You've seen that the legal action that's taken in the incarceration of people from all walks of life, and that's obviously advocated also by the European Union. And we were well on the way towards that here in the United States, despite our First Amendment constitutional protections, which you guys don't have.
Agreed. Well, with all the problems you've outlined, Robert, is there hope that an organization like the ACIP or the Maha movement could actually reverse some of these problems? I mean, when you were talking about the turtles all the way down and how that is essentially created a lifetime cartel monopoly-like situation, if theoretically, if the ACIP was to revise the safety requirements in terms of approving a product, could that be theoretically applied to the entirety of a back catalog, requiring every drug to go through?
So what Secretary Kennedy has done in conjunction with Marty Makary at FDA is make a policy statement that any newly authorized vaccine needs to be compared against a true placebo control. Now, we're about to see where the rubber hits the road on that, because the FDA just authorized a respiratory syncytial virus vaccine for children from Merck. And how that goes down will be very instructive. I don't have a crystal ball about what's going to happen with ACIP. I know the position I intend to do, which is to act with integrity and transparency, with keeping in mind vaccine injured and the rights of classic medical freedom rights, the rights of informed consent, etc. But I have no idea whether my point of view will prevail, what will happen, what the blowback will be, whether or not the new director of the CDC, when she is confirmed, because right now we don't have a director of the CDC. She is appointed but not confirmed. Whether they will accept those recommendations, et cetera, et cetera. So right now it's all very murky. Is it possible? Yes. Is it likely? We shall see. And will it manifest? Time will tell. And then the next question is it sustainable? If you have major policy shifts during this administration over the next 3 years, will it be rescinded as soon as there is political turnover in the executive branch? Or where will the American people and throughout the world readjust to a new normal in which these principles become expected? I don't have that crystal ball right now. All I can say is I'll do my best, and I'm confident that my fellow appointees, at least to date, are also committed to integrity, transparency, and quality data analysis.
I do want to touch upon the COVID vaccine for a moment, because you've been a vocal critic of that, as have I and many of our colleagues. We've seen in the US now the recommendations for certain groups is now being withdrawn, but there are many of us who believe that product should be withdrawn fully, and not just withdrawn fully, but actually full accountability be applied for its approval, its marketing, its use, to get justice for those who have been harmed. What's your view on the future of the COVID vaccinations? Should they be withdrawn in your personal view? And if so, is there hope that could happen?
So there's various narratives about me and what I support and don't support that are told by people that really don't pay attention. They have various political agendas. About 3 years ago, as the data, to my eyes, shifted, and we moved. My initial position early on was that these products should be reserved. It was very much aligned with Martin Kulldorff and the Great Barrington Declaration, that these products should be reserved for the individuals who are at highest risk. And part of that was very pragmatic in my argument, that these are leaky. That's the technical vaccine term they have a significant number of breakthrough infections. And administering a leaky vaccine in a global sense to all cohorts, including those that are not at particular risk for the disease, is pretty much a guaranteed recipe for driving evolution of vaccine-resistant mutant virus. And whether or not that's been the cause and effect, certainly we have had the emergence of increasingly vaccine-resistant virus mutants. And it follows fundamental principles of evolution that would be the case. So does that prove it? No, it's a scientific hypothesis. But there's certainly, the data are consistent with that hypothesis. That was my position, was that we should reserve these products for the people at very high risk. And at the time, that appeared to be individuals certainly greater than 55 of age or 65, typically morbidly obese, diabetics, and some special populations such as children with cystic fibrosis, just to pull an example out of the hat, children with pre-existing conditions. That was my position back when I wrote op-eds with Peter Navarro for the Washington Times that triggered the Atlantic Monthly attacks and many of the other attacks. Then, as time went by, one gathered more and more data. The community gathered more and more data over time from a wide variety of international sources, up against very strong headwinds. It was very difficult to get access to government data. And part of the best government data, as I recall, came from Scotland at the time until it was started to be censored. That the analysis of those data across multiple sources indicated that as one looked at adverse events associated with the virus, so outcomes from the virus, disease and death, stratified by risk groups, you could, clearly see that there were certain risk groups that were at higher risk of death or significant disease or hospitalization, and others that were at very low risk, say young children. And unfortunately, if you also stratified by risk group, similar risk groups, adverse events associated with the vaccine products, the genetic vaccine products, what you found was that those high-risk groups also were at higher risk for disease and death from the vaccine products. And so when you did what the CDC and others refused to do, of doing a true stratified risk-benefit ratio across these, not just healthy normals, but across the high-risk groups, what you found was that because the risk of the virus and the risk of the vaccine both went up in those groups, that you still maintain this risk-benefit imbalance where the perception was that the risk was higher than the benefit, even in those high-risk groups for disease from the virus. When that became clear, I shifted my position. I'm attacked routinely for having had the earlier position, but they never look at the timestamp. But I shifted my position as the data shifted, which I think is the responsible thing to do. I'm not perfect. When the data changes, you have to change your stance. And I, together with many other physicians, recorded a teleconference, a video conference, press conference at Del Bigtree Studios down in Texas, in which I called for the vaccine products to be withdrawn from the market about 3 years ago. My position on that has not changed. The risk-benefit ratio continues to look even more grim over time. And I just today retweeted some new data that suggests that the situation may be even worse than we thought back then. So the political reality is that, first of all, the president has a sense of ownership of Operation Warp Speed and of these products. That has been tempered over time, but still remains. The political pushback from people like Senator Cassidy, who from Louisiana, who's opposing RFK Jr.'s position and really extracted some concessions during his Senate confirmation hearings, including the right to appoint one of the new members of the ACIP. That hasn't happened yet. And has met with there's a new lobbying organization for mRNA manufacturers in the United States. And Senator Cassidy has met with those people. So there's organized pushback on the other side from the industry that has had billions and billions of dollars, if not trillions, invested in this technology and perceives this as a gold rush opportunity, this use of RNA as a drug. And so the political reality is that unilateral withdrawal of mRNA, it's really not mRNA, it's a synthetic chemical polymer that can be used to produce protein like RNA, but insertion of modified pseudouridine bases all through the mRNA molecule makes it something very different. It's a synthetic molecule that has RNA-like features, but it's like eating soy-based hamburgers. They aren't hamburgers. They're soy-based products designed to taste and look like hamburgers. And that's kind of a reasonable metaphor. Only that would be the case if those soy-based hamburger products, you would eat them and they wouldn't degrade in your digestive system and you would pass them essentially intact. That would be an even better metaphor for these pseudo-RNAs. But it's the industry power, finance, lobbying, etc., that's been arrayed against this is enormous. And as I mentioned, the pharmaceutical industry in the United States, in part because of their ability to bankroll these entities like the broadcast medium, print medium, medical societies, etc., has managed to capture the entire medical, pharmaceutical, academic, industrial, governmental complex. It's a big blob, I think is a good way to put it. And so the secretary, despite what various small numbers of loud voices assert, doesn't really have the latitude to just act unilaterally in this. The secretary serves at the authorization of the president. The secretary can easily be overruled by the president or his chief of staff. And the secretary has to operate within the confines of the law as established by Congress. So there's a lot of things that he can do. He's not a king, and he's not royalty even, although it sometimes seems that way. He's like black sheep royalty. And he just can't act unilaterally. So what I can tell you from talking to him from time to time is that he has the mind of a lawyer. He is still extremely sharp. He's sometimes a little bit siloed. He will have enormous depth of information and recollection about a topic area, but sometimes he won't be aware of the adjacencies because he hasn't been briefed on that. He hasn't gone down those rabbit holes But within those that he has focused on, he has enormous depth and recall capabilities. So despite his age, in the areas that he's an expert in, he knows a lot more than I do, and he can recall it like that. He has a very good, as a prosecution trial attorney would, he has a very good skill set relating to strategy and tactics. And all these people that are saying, oh, you need to tell Bobby this, or you need to tell Bobby that, or whatever. No, you don't tell Bobby anything, not because he's resistant to it, but because he already knows it. He is very, very well versed in the political realities of what he's grappling with. I have complete confidence in him and his judgment and his strategic and tactical insights. And I know for a fact that he is moving within the operational latitude that he has very effectively. But he has to color between the lines. He doesn't have the option of going outside the Overton window and doing stuff in a unilateral fashion. He has to operate within the constraints that exist, and he has a very good sense of what those constraints are and what he can do about it.
Yeah, I think most would argue even if he became president, he would still suffer some of those same constraints. Well,
more so. I mean, right now he's running the largest agency, bigger than DOD, in the United States government.
Yeah,
that is so far off the reservation from what he's done in the past that it's amazing that he's able to pull it together. And with the Maha Commission agenda, he's taking on multiple of the largest, most entrenched, most powerful industries in the world. The only one he's not taking on, I think, is the military-industrial complex. And he even has some touch points in that having to do with biodefense. So he's fighting a multi-front war with a bureaucracy that is often passive-aggressive and very skilled at things like slow walking and resisting change. And I think he's making remarkable progress given the headwinds that he faces.
absolutely. I absolutely agree. I want to ask you, what can ordinary people at home who have been critical of what's been going on over the last few years, what can they do to support these types of initiatives? What can they do to support Maha? What can they do to support you? What can they do to support change in their own country? Speaking to my audience in the UK and other parts of the world, what can they do to help build a more trustworthy health system that puts human health above profits? What can individuals do? Because in situations like this, we can celebrate people like yourselves and Secretary Kennedy getting into position, Jay Bhattacharya and others, Koldorf. But that in some ways still creates a situation where we create a deference to outside authority when there is personal agency we can take.
Yep.
Yep.
So personal sovereignty and self-actualization is kind of the topic area that you're touching on. What can individuals do? It's useful to have prominent figures that are on the hero's journey, if you're familiar with that metaphor.
Yes.
And by the way, for any who are on that journey, it's important to keep in mind that usually the hero is, the metaphor, they return with some new insight or knowledge into the nature of the world, and they're typically rejected by the people when they come back with that new knowledge. This is Plato's cave. This is the story of the Greek myth about bringing fire to humanity, etc. This is age-old wisdom. the way you phrased it, I usually emphasize the importance of community, that community being fragmented is one of the things that allows authoritarianism and totalitarianism to slip into our lives. Because humans have a fundamental need to be connected to other humans. So I advocate always that people form real bonds with their surrounding community, talk to others, engage with others. Don't be shy. Don't self-censor. It's hard to do that. But at the same time, you have to do this with empathy. You can't, being smash mouth and saying, oh, they're all sheep or whatever, doesn't get you to conversions. It doesn't get you to broadening your coalition or your consensus. I think that individual advocacy for whatever it is you perceive as the important central truth, and I don't want to tell you what that is. I could say it was medical freedom. I could say it was bioethics. I could say a lot of things. But me saying it is not the same as you believing it. Forgive the fly. So I think that we all believe that the new advent of social media matters, that the voice of the people through podcasts, through interactions on whatever your favorite platform is, TikTok, X, whatever, matters. I think it does. I think we are defeating over time and will continue to defeat the power of centralized media to control the narrative. And when we fragment the ability of centralized media to control the narrative, then it defaults back to a more decentralized, community-based ability to derive strategies and approaches and ethics and policy positions that truly reflect a broader consensus. So engage with your local community, build community. I don't mean just on the device. You know, these things are both a strength and a weakness. Personally, I recommend that everybody takes periodic vacations from the iPhones or whatever your favorite platform is. Build community, connect with others, engage with people who have different points of view with empathy, not just in opposition. Remember this thing that I was taught long ago, if you push, they push back, and you end up nowhere. So whether you're a person of faith or not, the lessons associated with Christian faith, particularly the New Testament, in terms of how to approach people and how to convince people and engage with people, I think have a lot of merit. Violence is not a solution, despite what they think in Ukraine, Russia, Iran, and Israel. And if you don't want to buy into that, change the world one step at a time with your neighbors. Don't believe anything anybody says, including me. Make your own decisions. Get multiple sources of information. I think we haven't talked about fifth generation warfare or psychological warfare hardly at all here, but in a fifth gen warfare battlescape, your mind is the terrain. There are no rules of engagement. In a optimized fifth generation warfare battlefield environment, which is basically anytime you enter any public media space now, you go on to Facebook or whatever, you are subjected to fifth generation warfare constantly. The narratives are being crafted around you. You need to realize that you're the target, that the perpetrators by design should not be visible to you. That's a core tenet of fifth generation warfare. That the objective of your government there in the UK, and as well as many other actors, is to control the information that you're able to access and to literally control your thoughts, feelings, and emotions, to plant ideas into you through things like neurolinguistic programming, nudge technology, etc.
Quick time out, because if you've been questioning the systems shaping our world, then you'll love what we've created with The Thinking Society. The Thinking Society is a 6-week online course designed to help you sharpen your critical thinking, spot bias and manipulation, and make sense of the chaos without losing your mind or your relationships. You'll learn directly from brilliant minds like Sinead Stringer, David Sharalambos, and Dr. David Thunder, and join a community of people who actually want to think for themselves. Head to weareelevate.org/thinking society or hit the link in the description to learn more and sign up today. Now back to the conversation.
The government has become convinced that once it is elected, it has the right to do this to the electorate, which is extremely concerning, in my opinion, because it negates sovereignty, autonomy, and the whole logic of democracy, because the tech is so powerful. So be aware that this is what's going on, and that one of the things you can do is to think for yourself, and increasingly in this battlescape, you are forced not just to think for yourself, but also, more spam, but not just to think for yourself, but to rely on your own ethical foundations and functionally your heart and soul, not just your mind, but your heart, that will tell you what is truth. Humans have an amazing ability to perceive truth. There are psychopaths that can trick us and sociopaths, but for the most part, I convey almost as much information through my persona, how I approach, this is the medium is the message, right? So in all kinds of ways, I'm signaling to the person listening to this podcast about whether I'm a person of integrity, whether I really believe in what I'm saying, whether I'm being honest or I'm trying to shape how you're thinking. We spend our lives becoming adults, learning these cues. So use them. And when you have that gut feeling that this politician or that person at the WEF or at the WHO or the UN or whomever is and trying to advance some agenda, and it doesn't feel right here, it probably isn't right. You're probably being manipulated. So listen to those voices. I guess that's my general advice for folks. And don't allow yourself to buy into the logic that you're a victim. This is one of the characteristics of much of the philosophy of the left is self-victimization. I'm not a victim. I've had all kinds of shit thrown at me. I'm surprised my shirt is still white. But I don't take the cloak of being a victim. I could play the victim card. Oh, poor me. They're being so mean to me. Blah, 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 blah. Big cry, tears. No, I'm sorry. That's not okay. Don't be a victim. Be a warrior. Be independent. Recognize that you're a sovereign individual. You have rights as a sovereign individual and to think for yourself and to think for your own family, your children, and interact proudly with your community, even if what you think is different. Even if you're a far left, nose ring, blue hair, Karen, if you approaching that with integrity and logic, and you feel strongly about those things that matter to you, then be proud of it. Carry your head up and don't apologize for it. But please don't be a victim.
Thank you, Robert. This has been a very insightful conversation, and we wish you all the very best in your position, with courage, Godspeed, and willingness to continue to walk in the direction that you've been walking now for many years into this new position. You certainly have our support and backing, despite the critics out there. This is a pivotal moment, and it's there's a lot of hope resting on individuals like yourself. But this final part of the conversation is really a reminder to everyone that we all have a role to play. And we've talked about some of the lobbies out there in the world. Well, let's form our own lobby. We are a mass of people who can influence the world around us. And it's time that we continue to do that, particularly at this moment. We don't have a better opportunity than now to really help play a role in helping to influence some of the changes that people like Robert are trying to make. So thank you so much for all the work that you've done in the last few years, and long may it continue. So thanks for being on the show with us today.
My pleasure. And thanks for your commitment and service to your community and courage. So this too shall pass. Just if we stay true to ourselves, I think we'll be okay.
Absolutely. Amen to that.
A huge thank you to Dr. Robert Malone for joining me today and for his courage in stepping into this role at such a pivotal moment. As you've heard, the battle for medical integrity, informed consent, and public health transparency is still unfolding, and it's going to take all of us, not just those in official positions, to push for real change. Towards the end of this conversation, you heard Dr. Malone speak about fifth-generation warfare and how modern propaganda, censorship, and narrative control are shaping what we think, feel, and believe, often without us even realizing it's happening. If you would like to develop the tools to see through these tactics, to think critically, and to build intellectual resilience, then I highly recommend joining us for the Thinking Society, our 6-part course on critical thinking, social influence, and how to transform the systems so that we can stay sovereign in an age of manipulation. You can find all the details at weareelevate.org/Thinking Society, or just check the link in the description below today's episode. And if this conversation resonated with you, then please do share this episode. Spread the word. Help us to challenge the old narratives that no longer serve us. And if you haven't already, please make sure you subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, or wherever you tune in so you can stay up to date with the latest episodes as we continue to explore how we can all live free and prosper in a changing world. Until next time, stay strong, stay sovereign, and keep challenging the system. I'm Astin-Gregory. Thanks for tuning in.